Hi, my name is Andy Schmuckler. I'm the man on a mission in the title. The mission is to convey a big picture view of the human world that I sincerely believe could help human civilization to survive. And it's a strange thing to uh, try to be taken credibly, uh, but uh, I would think that the place to start in each one of these episodes is for me to go into some of the smaller picture things that people are already thinking about. And, um, I look at the smaller things all the time. I could take an exam on all the ins and outs of all of Trump's cases. Uh, because the drama has me in, and because it's a way of that those trials are a way of acting out a rather fundamental battle going on in America. But I also want to continue to pursue my mission, which is to get people to take a look to see what it is that I've spent my lifetime creating, which is looking at the human story, our biological evolution, the breakthrough into civilization, all the history that's happened in the last 5 or 10,000 years, and the circumstances of the world today. To look at it in an evolutionary perspective, I think that we haven't begun really as a culture to integrate the implications of the evolutionary understanding of how um, life evolved, producing us, and then how we did something rather unusual in the history of life, which was we started inventing our own way of life. Anyway, there are some interesting things that can be concluded if you look more deeply into what the evolutionary perspective shows about several different things, and that's what I've been spending my life developing. It really does put things in a rather different light, but uh, everything else that's going on is ultimately connected with it because basically there's a way of seeing things a lot more whole than we generally do, and I think seeing things whole is really essential. So I'm happy to set aside the big picture thing that's really driving me. But I'm also actually driven by the much more immediate things. For the last 20 years, I've been fully engaged in a battle to help American democracy survive the force of fascism I saw rising. Maybe 30 years since I saw something in the early 1990s about that Rush Limbaugh showed about what was happening. And then I spent a decade doing radio here in the very conservative Shenandoah Valley of Virginia. And I was actually engaging with an audience that was also exposed on that same powerful AM station in Harrisonburg, Virginia, for 3 hours to Rush Limbaugh. So it gave me in a very small arena a chance to go to do battle for the hearts and minds of these people that were imbibing the poisons that Limbaugh was putting out. Well, what happened in Kansas City? What a what a shame. I mean, it wasn't just a tragedy like the kind we Americans are subjected to all the time. It was a tragedy that stole from a whole community. What was there? More than 1 million people participated in this celebratory thing with the Super Bowl winning Kansas City Chiefs coming home. It's not just your random moment that gets turned into a moment of terror and tragedy. It changed it changed the meaning of the day from something special in a very positive way to something special in a very negative way. And in that respect, it's illustrative of what the force of fascism does as it works in the whole network of cause and effect. I mean, ruining something wonderful and turning it into something terrible is a great way to make the world more broken, and fascism is basically about that. So we find here that we've got a tragedy like this for obvious reasons. What's happened in our politics around the issue of guns is obviously the reason. Not that there would be any guarantee that there would never be anything, but you just have to compare the United States with just about every other free, prosperous, democratic society. None of them have our kind of homicide rate or gun death rate in general. It's obvious that everybody else pretty much on the planet has made very different political choices about how to balance rights of individuals with respect to guns with the legitimate requirements of public safety in the society. What are we? We're like 10 times as many gun deaths and homicides and mass events like like we see so regularly now in America, kids and parades and rock concerts. I mean, anything can be people at a theater. All these different towns going through my mind. The last one was Aurora, Colorado, and then there's Las Vegas, and then there's the school in Texas. Anything can be turned quickly into something very dark and destructive and traumatic. Makes the world more broken. Other societies, they're much, much, much more rare. And fascism has accomplished this. The Republican Party has become a party of fascism. Just, when that happened, I tend to put the time of transition being like when the Republican Party transition from being the party being led by the first President Bush into the party that was made Newt Gingrich Speaker, and that was having a propaganda line being put out by the likes of Rush Limbaugh. That's how, but there's always been elements in the Republican Party, but nothing like this. So it's not really Donald Trump in this case that represents it's the NRA in alliance with the Republican Party, which goes way back. And it's got to do with how the Republican Party has made guns a source of their political power in the electoral realm. Now, the real power behind the Republican Party is this, I'm calling it fascism, but words can get slippery. But I think in this context, I think it's probably good to regard it as a kind of plutocratic force that was on a campaign struggling for power, that living in a democratic society or a substantially democratic society and working assiduously to take power and wealth from the American people and give it to the power hungry and the greedy, who already have more of power and more of wealth than the average person. I think that's I mean, that's always been an element of the Republican Party going back into the 19th century, when corporate America basically ran the Republican Party. But there was a willingness, if you consider President Eisenhower. Now, Eisenhower had a real affinity to the world of business. I think it was his Secretary of Treasury that said something like the business of America is business, and wasn't it somebody in his circle who said something like, good for General Motors is good for America. I mean, they've always been representative of the plutocratic interests, and that's the part of the brokenness that they brought to America. But I think that there remained in the Republican Party, like with Dwight Eisenhower, he may have been admiring and hung out with industrialists, but he believed in America as a democratic society. Well, this is what I think. I can't claim to be I read a big biography of Eisenhower. He was a very decent guy. I think he was an American patriot, too. I think he believed in democracy. But a force has risen in the Republican Party. The one that made alliance with the NRA of guns had an interest in cultivating guns as an issue that would distract lots of people from whom this plutocratic force was stealing power and money. But to use guns to distract them from looking at what's really being done in the power system, to fool them into giving their support at the ballot box to the force that's taking power and wealth away from them, because they've been inflamed to think that the gun issue is central to their well-being. And the party that represents protecting their vital interests in the gun issue is the Republican Party. It's like the magician, in a way, who I don't remember how you put it, but the trick is to distract people with your left hand or something, so they won't notice what you're doing with your right hand. Well, that's what the Republican Party's have been about with their supporters. And this is a party that has two main components. There's the real interest that runs it, that is hungry for more power and is capable of organizing very well to get more power and wealth. It's a smallish group of people who are already shown that they're rather good at getting power and wealth, and already shown that they're oriented toward that. And so you get people like the Koch brothers and Mitch McConnell and whoever else you want to put on that list. Very good at playing the game of power, and highly motivated in a way that there's no such thing as enough. And the people who can put together corporations and industries and political parties are going to be good at creating alliances, so they can translate a lot of things they could orchestrate to achieve something that's good for them, even if at the expense of many, many people. And part of the strategy they came up with, guns is just part of it. Abortion is the other one that works a little bit like this. And you can go to my website, abetterhumanstory.org, and look for something with abortion in the title, or guns, where I talk about this at greater depth, but or in other ways. If you're interested, it might be worth seeing them both. Um, the Republican Party has this element that's small but mighty and good at organizing to gain more power. The spirit of the gangster is a phrase that I use in my Better Human story about something that happens in civilized systems. Well, here we've got in America something that was rising, that was increasingly unifocal, if I may use that word, about getting more and more. Not like Eisenhower or even the first Bush, happy to play by the rules. No rules anymore. So no inhibition about completely exploiting and manipulating the people, because they may know how to use the power to get more for themselves. But in order to get power in what is still somewhat of a democratic society, they got to get a lot of people to vote for them that they're in the process of screwing. One way they've done is through the issue of guns. And so people yesterday, like Claire McCaskill from Missouri and a gun right person and Joy Reid, this is on MSNBC, they're talking about, we got to do something. And of course, we do have to do something. But we shouldn't underestimate how big of an investment this is for the Republican Party, and how well they've already created the political consciousness in the people, so that they're not going to be able to hear things that are obviously true. I ran for Congress in this district, 2011, 2012. It runs from the top of the Shenandoah Valley, south of Winchester, down the valley, out to the Shenandoah National Park a little bit, down Interstate 81 to Roanoke, and then over to Lynchburg and a little bit in that area, of a 2-to-1 Republican Party advantage. I did a little bit. I didn't do much better than that, but this is not an easy, even back then, the conservative world was not an easy nut to crack. It was, even then, and some people try to organize events for me that they would invite their Republican neighbors to come. Even then, they were surprised to find out that the process that had demonized Democrats had been so successful that people they had assumed would, of course, come, declined. Can't go listen to a Democrat. There's a world that's been painted for them, and part of that world has to do with guns. And I, having run for office, I know that a lot of those Republicans, I knew that I was encountered by voters who would just want to know about my position on guns. Like that would have been enough. Anything that's short of, absolutist gun rights would disqualify me. It was just easy to see that was the case for these one-issue voters. That was something to see. Anyway, I do get to put op-eds out there, and I've put out there several times, probably in the last 10 years, in my op-eds, some reality that should be impactful to take in for people who relate to the gun issue in a NRA kind of a way. they've been told that all their liberties depend on an absolutist right for everybody to have guns all the time under any circumstances. You don't do any kind of regulation. I mean, that's the extreme version of it, but the right to bear arms. What about nuclear arms? For crying out loud. Would you want everybody to have, an F-36 fighter jet? If fully armed, the right to bear arms like the AR-15, but they think that all their liberties depend on the government doing nothing to regulate guns in the public safety. So what I do is I point out, I guess it's been probably twice in 10 years, I point out something that's obvious, that the world has a number of societies that in which the people enjoy liberties that are like ours. And they're living in societies in which there are, as we say, common sense gun regulations. And there are so many fewer gun deaths, and they don't live in a free fire zone where we have all these repeated national traumas. I mean, it's obvious. It's obvious that that you can regulate guns, save thousands and thousands of lives, and not jeopardize any of your liberties. They've also been sold the idea that the Constitution, what the Constitution says about guns, it affirms their position, which is nonsense. I mean, they've got the Supreme Court that would throw them that. But why would those people who were so magnificently economical in formulating a constitution in words waste a whole bunch of words talking about a well-regulated militia being da-da-da? No. They were saying it is in this context that citizens have a right to bear arms in their role as being part of a well-regulated militia. The militia's purpose would be to maintain the legal order if necessary. The Republicans, NRA types, have turned that on their heads. They've made it out to be not defending the order, but defending themselves from the legally constituted order. In other words, they want the citizens to be armed because they think that that's going to protect them from the tyranny that somehow is uppermost in their minds, but in a way that leads them to lend their support to a force that really is about tyranny, a plutocratic force that is happy to work with a guy like Trump, a plutocratic force like thought can control Hitler back in the early 1930s in Germany. Well, getting back to guns. The Republican Party gains a great deal of fuel from the gun issue. People who will consistently vote for them on the basis of that one issue, which they totally misunderstand. Not only do they think that all our liberties depend on it, not only do they misinterpret the Constitution, but they foolishly believe that if they give an inch, it'll immediately become a mile. They're worried about being completely disarmed. Well, that's not going to happen in America. I mean, we have a political process. Things are going away in different directions. We could come up with a way of protecting the public interest well enough, a lot better than we do now. Maybe we would be looser than the Germans or the Japanese about guns. Um, the Canadians are looser than they are, but we could create a uh, much safer America. But the Republicans, in their quest for power, have manipulated people into a place where they have some very profound beliefs about the guns that are false, but it's not obvious how you would move them. But part of dealing with this issue, I think, should be addressing those people in terms of their belief systems. If they feel so passionately that any movement in the direction of sanity represents a profound threat to their liberty and well-being and autonomy, that's not going to be conducive to making a lot of political progress where there are a lot of such people. And I gather that Missouri is one of those places. I mean, I guess it ranks 48th worst in terms of its gun laws out of the 50 states. That's what they said. The people have been sold by propagandists a bill of goods. I mean, the NRA has been working for more than a generation with the help of Republican politicians on selling people on the idea that there's nothing that should be done besides thoughts and prayers, because they're not going to, they can't be seen to be as indifferent as they are to these massacres. Thoughts and prayers is supposed to cover them like a fig leaf. But this issue is something that power has profited from. And the Supreme Court that this power has given us has interpreted in Heller and in this new, more recent case, just really ridiculous rulings that are mandating that Americans will be at each other's throats for as far as the eye can see. I mean, these decisions making it so hard for localities to pass decent gun laws in the name of the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment makes me feel like puking. I have a sort of a friend who's not a Trumpy, but is a Republican. He's retired Navy, and he's a really sweet, decent man. He's the first guy on the right that I've encountered on the web with whom I could engage in a substantive and civil discussion. I have had, I launched a website, nonesoblind.org. You can find it on my present website, abetterhumanstory.org. I've had almost 20 years of interacting with right-wingers on the comment sections in newspapers and on my website and on other websites. And it has been increasingly, now the right wing became capable of constructive dialogue. even civil dialogue. The people who might have done it stayed quiet. And the people who were not quiet, who came out onto the stage, came out to do battle. And the battles never had anything to do with the substance. It was all about, not all about, a lot of it was about insults, and little of it made sense. And then this guy comes out, and he's engaged with me again and again over some years as my pieces appear in the newspaper, including the online version. And he would come and in some ways, generally challenge me. And we've become friends and have met with our wives and with another couple, who are Republicans and also really wonderful people. And we get together and we just agree not to talk politics, and it stays wonderful. But he and I were sort of exploring through emails and sometimes a little bit on phone whether we might talk politics other than publicly online. And so we got deeper into things. And I encountered things, even though he'd been clear that he was not, he did not like Trump. He didn't disagree with me, at least in terms of plus or minus. He was like this on Trump. But he nonetheless had imbibed so much of the misinformation and distortions that are sold to conservative America by the propagandists who are running conservative America. That he, from my point of view, I felt like he really couldn't see obvious things. I mean, if you could see what Trump is, you should be able to infer that the party that's backing this guy and is doing whatever he says, even obviously to the nation's peril, like this thing about how he would be destroying NATO. I know what this guy feels like. He's a real American patriot, my conservative friend. But part of what he's imbibed is just a little glimpse in some diatribe, or not diatribe. I mean, he's such a decent guy, but the way he saw Biden was right there with something about guns that told me that he had bought the con job that the Republicans and the NRA have been selling to get these one-issue voters and to get people who they're screwing to give them their support at the ballot box. He doesn't draw all the obvious inferences about what that says about a party that would do that on the issue of guns. And I just sort of threw up my hands. I've gone through a transition from thinking. For a little while, I thought that I was moving the guy. He practically indicated that I was having an influence on it. And then I got this thing, and let's go back to politics. If that could happen after all this. But if we're going to do something about guns, we got to know what we're up against. That's the book I published in 2015 before Trump arrived on the scene. It's titled "What We're Up Against." And I think liberal America's role in this crisis is that there has been a failure for years to recognize that we're up against something. Now it's visible. We spent a lot of time trying to show it. If you all you got to do is look at what's being done on the issue of guns. That would be enough to tell you what a what a force of brokenness has taken over the Republican Party. Um, all you would have to know is their position about climate change. I mean, their role with respect to climate change, and climate change is a very big deal. All you'd have to know is their position on climate change, in which you can see that they have chosen to serve the fossil fuel industry to keep its short term profits higher, even at the expense of the potential catastrophe that we might be inflicting on our children and grandchildren and the rest of the human world to come. All you'd have to know is that about them. All you'd have to know about this Republican Party and what we're up against is the role it plays in the relationship between the, uh, the races and ethnicities in America, in particular on that long-standing, crucial dimension of American brokenness, the division between white America and black America. What role has the Republican Party played in that? Well, no better than on the other things. What role has it played in terms of defending or dismantling the rule of law? All you'd have to know is some of that. All you have to do is see that the Republican Party is allowing itself to be an instrument of a criminal who committed the most serious crimes in American history, many of them right in front of us, if we had eyes to see. Something really weird has happened in conservative America that a person as decent and actually, in his case, reasonably well educated, could believe the things that they believe. Nothing has ever befuddled me more than what's been accomplished in terms of how the force that's running conservative America has been able to turn off the intelligence of intelligent people in some way that enabled it to get intelligent people to believe things that even a modicum of intelligence should tell them are simply false. That's just what they do, and we're up against that. I don't have any great tricks how to bring people back to reality. I just, keep on trying to show that reality, but I don't understand how somebody as intelligent as my friend, retired, fairly high up in the military, intelligent, extremely decent guy. I can see what happened. I don't quite see how it happens. I was thinking that maybe this intelligence thing is related to a phenomenon that happening in the American electorate, which is that there's increasingly a division. There are migrations of Americans, and the suburbs are going Democratic. And the Democrats are losing a fair amount of their blue collar, what had always been their blue collar base. And one of the ways in which I think more to the point, is that if you look at college educated people, they're becoming increasingly democratic. And if you look at the people who, let's say, have, didn't go past high school anyway, there's an increasing divide along party lines in which there's a movement toward the Republican Party on the uneducated side. Not my friend, but when I'm in liberal suburbs of Washington, I'm surrounded by people, all of whom have college degrees, and a great many of them have professional degrees. When I'm out here in rural Virginia, the majority don't have college degrees. Very few people would be PhDs, let alone, PhDs published by university presses like I am. This is a microcosm I get to see of one of these red-blue dynamics that's happened in America. I correlate that with a couple of things. One is that if you look at what's happened in terms of economic power, strength, wealth, the educated have made progress over the last, 20 years, 40 years. The urban areas that vote Democratic have grown proportionately richer than the average American. The rural areas have been losing ground. Maybe I don't know where small towns fit in. My guess is that it's the professional magnets that we're talking about, the really educated people. They're doing very well in this information age economy and high technology economy is developing. It has not been a good year for. I think that there are figures about blue collar workers have really made no economic progress since the early 70s, something like that. There are at least some categories that would correspond with the people who don't have degrees. But I also kind of wonder whether, at least the question has arisen in my mind. Is it that the people who haven't gotten much education are more easily conned by a bunch of BS like the Republicans continually put out? I campaigned for Congress on the slogan "Truth for a Change." I was trying to show the whole district, most of which is Republican, that the Republican Party is selling them a bill of goods, which it is. Did a decent job of showing it. Didn't ever really feel like I succeeded in having people recognize it. Something has happened at the psychological level. Maybe getting a college education gives a person some immunity from being manipulated in the way that I think the Republican base has been. I would like to think that the college education would mean that. I grew up with the belief in such things, being very deep in my family culture, that part of our job is to become sufficiently educated that we understand the world we're living in, are able to think and act uh, appropriate and meaningful ways in it. Uh, Observing college education, I've had a couple of experiences being involved in college education, but I don't really know. I went to a college graduation. I heard all these fine words, but I don't know if I believe that the young people who are getting their degree on those days had learned the important things because they had gotten themselves a college degree. I asked my niece who graduated a couple of questions around that, and I'm not sure. I would love to believe that they actually did learn the kinds of things that would make them less capable of believing the kind of garbage that the gun lobby sells about our liberties. All you got to do is look around at Australia and Japan, and Germany, and France. You can see you don't have to pay any great cost to save a whole lot of lives and to transform your society from a battle zone into a safe zone, which is really important for a lot of people. I personally do not feel different in my life uh, because of how we handle the gun issue. I'm not afraid. I mean, I see what happens, at these terrible events. Recognize, there's no guarantees about whether I would ever be in the wrong place at the wrong time. But it doesn't really bother me because there's all kinds of stuff that can go wrong. I just consider probabilities, and learn to live with it. Just like I'm not afraid getting on an airplane. And this will be another 9/11. Something interesting happened psychologically, and maybe um, people are more vulnerable to that if they haven't learned things like critical thinking, which I would want a college education to mean in some meaningful way. Um, I personally had the advantage of having a dad who was, imposed critical thinking at every point in our conversations, and so I I got trained in that from uh, my father's knee, in a sense, at the dining room table. Um, and I'm not clear on how much that happens, um, how much people are valuing it. Um, as a teacher, I'm not a great teacher, but there's something to me, and I brought it to the classroom. I, I was surprised by how few people. I was told in advance before I entered the classroom, that my ideal of what students would be there for. I was told by people who knew stuff, oh, that might be 10%. Actually interested in learning for the sake of learning. The rest of them want their ticket stamped. And um, to a large degree, well, I found out that, well, I had thought, I'm going to make it so interesting. They're all going to just love it. But, uh, the people who warned me turned out to be right. And, uh, I was a good teacher to the ones who were like what I expected. Um, I was a mediocre teacher, I think, to the ones that were there to get their ticket punched. I mean, if you really want to know things, want to understand things, I'm a good interlocutor. but my colleagues who are really good teachers, much better than I came close to being, they were able to do things, uh, sort of tricky things in a way, or to simultaneously teach to the people who learn visually, to the people who learn orally, to the people who learn from the written text, and able to orchestrate those things. I got a chance to observe some really good teachers at work, and really, really appreciate what a good teacher could do. And I did the best I could, and I don't feel ashamed of what that was, because some people got a lot. But I was disappointed in myself. I was disappointed in my ability to turn people on to what a rich thing there is here to explore. I mean, if you study the 1850s, you just look at what's happening in terms of the issue of slavery and the unfolding dynamic that's basically preparing the way for civil war. It's just like the human world is just incredible and multidimensional and unfolds in such fascinating ways, and we're caught up in it. And everything that's important to us is all swept up into it. Changing people's consciousness is not easy. Some really good teachers seem to be able to do that for a certain number of their students. That's such a fine thing. It's in my mind, if there were a tarot deck, there would be a card for that kind of a teacher, because that relationship of mentoring the young, such a beautiful thing, unfolds, right? That's part of what I love about the Star Wars movie, that first one especially. When you see this young whippersnapper Luke Skywalker sort of whining about his situation like a teenage boy might, chafing under his obligation to his uncle and his aunt whom he loves, and then coming under the sway of this man who basically teaches him to be a Jedi. I've always kind of loved the idea of the teacher. I'm somewhat disappointed not to have been as good as I thought I would have been. But we have a job to do also to unteach here in America. And I'm not sure how you reach. My methods are probably good for people who are college educated enough to have some critical thinking, because the evidence and reasoning thing is sort of at the heart of what I do. Critical thinking. How can you believe what the most prodigious liar in human history says when it's contradicted by mountains of evidence that are right in front of our eyes? The gun issue is a part of that. We've got some people who are in a state of consciousness that I have not felt satisfied that I understand. The idea of a trance state seems like it maybe pertains in part. To believe that you need guns in order to protect yourself, and that other fantasy that if America were taken over by a fascist tyranny, that the weapons of civilians would prevent that fascist tyranny from imposing its will on the society as a whole. They've been conned into thinking that armed citizens would have a chance to organize and deploy itself and somehow resist the full might of the American military commanded by a fascist leader? Makes no sense. Well, that's where people have gone to, and on issue after issue. Climate change, how can you not believe that there's climate change? I mean, well, first of all, how would you find out if it was? Well, you get the people who know the most. You consult the experts. Oh, the experts, 99 point something percent, all agree, hey, this is happening. This is a human cause. This is a big deal. This has to be dealt with. Obviously, this is a big deal. It has to be dealt with. I mean, the evidence is, just, we haven't needed the evidence to pile up to this extent. We already had enough evidence to know a lot. Well, some people back in the 70s, like Exxon. And I put it in my PhD dissertation. It was just a little piece, but there. That's when humankind should have been acting. But they managed to instill, just like with the gun issue, absolute nonsense of, oh, the science is unsettled. Well, how do you get the 99%? I was on TV in the mid 90s with the Republican Party's county chair or city, county chair, I think it was. So he was there, and I was the Democratic spokesperson. He comes in with this in the mid 90s. The science is unsettled. What a lot of nonsense. I mean, we know that the fossil fuel industry was already engaged in a campaign to sell the Republican base on what was obviously nonsense, contradicting the near unanimity of climate scientists. So one of the places that I think that we need to start actually in dealing with this whole thing about what we're up against, its reservoir of power lies in the minds of the Republican base, how they feel about abortion, how they feel about the gun issue, how they feel about immigration, how they feel about the whole idea of cooperating with the other side to get good things done for the nation, which the Republican base is not into, even though that's the obvious thing that everybody's required to do in honor of making our constitutional system work for the purposes it was designed, which is to navigate our best way possible into the future, take care of the needs of the American people. What other purpose does a government have? These people have been also conned into believing somehow that fighting the Democrats and demonizing them is your national responsibility. That could never be your national responsibility. However, the other side is, the job always is, can you find ways of working together that make things better? What can you agree upon? I mean, it's obviously indefensible to behave the way the Republicans behave, like obstruction, across the board obstructionism. Back when the Republicans basically, let's just say, cut off Obama's presidency by blocking his attempt to accomplish anything that required the participation of Congress. And much of a presidential leadership is about what they can get through Congress. That could take us into how Obama exemplified the weakness of liberal America, the failure to comprehend what we were up against. There was a need to fight something back there, and Obama pretended that there wasn't. There's been a need to fight for the hearts and minds of the Republican base for a long time. Liberal America forfeited that fight, and now we got to deal with the consequences. That we're 30 years into this process, where the people who were basically seen sane, decent Republicans to a large extent, say back in the time of the presidency of the first Bush, could become the supporters of a Republican Party that's become a force of fascism. A transformation took place, and there wasn't enough fighting for the hearts and minds of those people. I had an impact here. The only time in my life that I've ever felt like I had an impact on the world around me that I could see. I think there was a slight change in the realm of discourse, and there was a community of discourse that was created between me and the conservatives that sort of tied things together better rather than driving things apart the way Limbaugh was doing, trying to make conservative Americans hate and despise the baby killers on the other side, the people who want to come for your guns. Liberal America ignored the rise of that transformation that took place, and there was a transformation. I experienced it from like in the mid 1990s. Talking to the conservatives around here felt, I think, basically the same as continuous with Eisenhower, Reagan, Bush, basically still intact as a part of America that was conservative, and that had a lot of fine qualities in it. And then you get to this. And I tried to sell liberal gatekeepers. I was trying to become a bigger radio person. I never lack for ambition, this man on a mission. The big forces at work here, and I saw that Limbaugh was a big force at work that was poisoning the American mind in a way that sets the stage for things like what we see in the rise of Trump. So I tried to persuade people who are gatekeepers of bigger stations to put me on and let me engage with basically to fight against Limbaugh for their hearts and minds, where he was going to try to make it out that there's one side with all the righteousness and the other side is just simply despicable, and you should feel contempt and rage toward them, and not even contemplate getting your hands dirty trying to work with them. I was going to try to show that the two sides can engage in a process that moves towards something better maybe than what both brought in before. What I said in my radio shows is to allow a radio conversation be representative of weaving that thing together. I tried to show that liberal ideas and conservative ideas each had their half-truths. That what a given issue, each side had a piece of what's valuable, like like the usual conflict between liberty and order or something like that. There are times when you got to weigh different sides of things. And there's a need. I said, to find the higher wisdom that that overcomes the contradiction and finds the path forward, that gives the right amount of weight to the liberty side and the right amount of weight to the order side. And that we could do those kinds of conversations and build something together. We could build a better understanding. We could build a better human connection. We could build a better community of discourse so that we can talk about things in a way that leaves us feeling better able to work together cooperatively to make the human world better. What Limbaugh was doing was disabling Americans on different sides of the divide from working together. It was part of the plutocratic divide and conquer strategy. In addition to cultivating abortion and guns as one issue things to snag big chunks of voters by distorting realities of various kinds. In addition to those things, we've got I'm losing my way, and I hope you'll forgive me for that. Getting into an associative frame of mind is a very fun thing. I make the distinction between the jazz I'm trying to play here, which is trying to go with the flow rather than imposing the systematic presentation of sheet music, which is what I do on my website, betterhumanstory.org, where everything gets developed systematically. I like doing that because I think that that's a way of, in a sense, showing that there really is a coherent view, and little bits and pieces of it show the multidimensionality of it. I got to watch how the psychology in the political realm transformed the minds of these people, but I didn't understand how it was happening exactly. And not understanding how it's happening, I feel unsure of how this question should be answered. What can the rest of the nation is going to have to live with people who have been moved into this state of consciousness? What can the rest of the nation do to undo what the likes of Rush Limbaugh, Newt Gingrich, Fox News, Karl Rove, and Donald Trump has done to them? I don't think it would be smart for us to just try to beat them at the ballot box. That is essential. I mean, defeating them in the election of 2024, creating a landslide that will put the Donald Trump's opponent into the White House for 2025 to 2029. That is the urgent task. And there's a lot to be said about how that should be done. But we should also understand that part of the brokenness in America is not just the point of the spear of Donald Trump finding its way toward the heart of American democracy. There's also behind it this reservoir of something or other in the Republican base that has made them strangely dark and destructive. I mean, I think that if you had asked Americans in some hypothetical, you paint the picture of things, a situation where, um, let's say, what happened with the election of 2020 happened. And if you describe to them what, the defeat of a lawless candidate who then does all this stuff, all the way up to trying to pull off an insurrection, a coup d'etat, what would the response of the American people be to the leader that basically tried to overthrow American democracy right in front of everybody's eyes? Obviously preparing the way for it for months, just quite obvious that it was the big lie. How does anybody come to believe it? And I've written several pieces trying to come to an answer to that, because it's just so obviously a big lie. And if that's a big lie, it is obvious that somebody was trying to steal the election, and that was Donald Trump. And all you got to know about Donald Trump is he was trying to steal the election. And that should completely antagonize any genuine American conservative. But it doesn't. Donald Trump did all that right in front of us. Pretty transparent. I mean, we didn't know all the details we were to learn from the January 6th committee that painted the picture in great depth and compelling detail. It should be obvious. But we know that in the wake of the insurrection, and we had Republicans coming forward and speaking in ways that pretty soon they wouldn't even dare begin to speak that way, because Donald Trump was back in power. And the reason Donald Trump was back in power is that the base chose him. They told the Republican Party, if we've got to choose between you and Donald Trump, we're sticking with Donald Trump. So that gave him power over the Republican Party. And so McCarthy goes down to Florida, having excoriated him the week before. Now he goes down to kiss the ring, because Trump holds the sword over their heads, and the sword is put in his hand by the Republican base. The Republican base is the not only the reservoir, but the source of the brokenness at this stage. It was the Republican base that chose Donald Trump. Now, the plutocracy had manipulated the Republican base into being something that would make them vote against their interests again and again and again. But they were not intending to hand the party over to the likes of Donald Trump. But Donald Trump, either because of some aspect of his genius, or he just happened to luck into the moment, he was able to swoop down and take this Republican base and ride it to power. He hijacked the party, but it was the Republican base that was the problem. The problem is that they could look at a man like Donald Trump by 2015. The preponderant part of the Republican Party could look upon him and say, let's make him president. Even though he fit picture perfect, exactly the kind of guy you don't want to have be president. If you were to ask those guys on Mount Rushmore to produce a document a portrait of the kind of person who should not be given the powers of the American presidency. They would paint, at their extreme, they would paint a picture like Donald Trump, a guy who doesn't respect norms or laws, a guy who's utterly selfish, a guy who's got a cruel and angry streak, who likes to humiliate people, and who's ineducable. I mean, you can hardly imagine a worse combination of ingredients. But the Republican base had gotten to a place where somehow they could look at a guy like him and say, yeah, let's make him president. I mean, these are the people, or the children of the people, or the grandchildren of the people who were proud to vote for I like Ike. And Ike was such a better human being than Donald Trump. And Ronald Reagan had some genuinely good human qualities. I have some testimony that I could give. It has to do with what he showed about himself in response to Gorbachev. I found very impressive about there being an important goodness in Ronald Reagan. And I learned from people who work with Reagan a little bit too, but I don't really understand Reagan's vices and virtues, his strengths and weaknesses. He was a mixture that I didn't quite get. But there was a decency in that party, and decency is no longer allowed in the Republican Party. Already by 2015, I ran on 2012 implied basis that the Republican Party represented a bunch of lies. The same token, the coming of Trump has represented a transformation in the Republican Party. So already by 2015, that party, in a somewhat crowded field, admittedly, there was no obvious single alternative, but the biggest chunk, 40%, wanted Biden, and that was enough to make. But the other 60%, almost all of them were willing to climb on board. The never Trumper impulse in the Republican Party was very, very small, and so they were able to ride to power with him. The party that had cultivated that base that Trump hijacked was already pretty sociopathic and destructive. So there wasn't any real moral barriers in that party to becoming the instrument of something that was someone who was about as broken as a person could be. Yeah, and we're right to focus on keeping Trump away from power. That is the most important task of the moment. But we're also required to take on a task that we've neglected to our peril from the time of the rise of Limbaugh, which is we haven't been focused enough on fighting to help the people on the right become more whole. They're embodying a degree of brokenness that boggles my mind. And we need to find ways of repairing that brokenness. It was dangerous in 2015 that there should be such a political base that it would make Donald Trump president. That's already not a good thing. So we neglected that from the rise of Trump, and I couldn't get the gatekeepers to let me go. You know, he was the Godzilla of talk radio, and I describe myself as striving hard to be even the Tweety Bird of talk radio. I mean, he was huge, and he had a big impact. And then when Karl Rove became Bush's brain, the community of discourse that I'd felt so gratified to have created here in the Shenandoah Valley through an AM station. As a guest on a well listened to show, and was having my own show for 5 years every Sunday. I felt like I had a ringside seat to see something happen. And I fought here, and then the wave that had been created by all those powerful propagandists that constituted something that was transforming all of conservative America. I saw that what I had built got the image in my mind is when you see the footage of a hurricane coming onto some South Pacific island or something, and blowing the palm trees over, or blowing a grass hut over. I felt like that's what happened to what I had worked to achieve in the 1990s. Karl Rove, in his divisive politics. You know, we don't talk about something that happened in the Bush administration, which is really quite profound. I found it shocking. I wasn't a dove going into the Iraq thing. I had the mistaken notion that I thought that I had gleaned from a good sources that there really was a nuclear threat involving Saddam Hussein. I also had assessed that Saddam Hussein was the kind of person who might want to destroy the world and go down in those flames. Because I saw what he had done in Kuwait when he backed out and set everything on fire. And people worried about whether we're going to have something like a nuclear winter. I mean, that told me something about Saddam Hussein, and that combined with my misinformation about where things were with his nukes made me concerned that we not just let this be and let him emerge as somebody who would threaten what he might threaten. But I was appalled what I saw Biden doing with 9/11. There was a coming together of the nation in the wake of 9/11, and in my value system, that kind of unity is a good thing. We should all recognize that we're all in this together, and act accordingly. The people I live among have let go of that. We didn't fight for the people who said to me, Limbaugh's audience is not our concern. That's what I heard from a couple of liberal gatekeepers. Well, we are all in this together. That's the nature of democracy. We left a lot of our countrymen to the mercies of a fascistic force that was manipulating them with lies. That's not a small failure. But we can't change what we have done. But we should acknowledge that there's a history here of liberal America leaving a lot of our fellow citizens to be to receive just the message of the force of brokenness that's taken over the Republican Party. This is a time when maybe we ignore this problem for a little till after the election. Or maybe the part of the way of waging this election is to put forward messages into the American body politic that both move potential swing voters to vote for American democracy, and maybe also are effective in helping address the pathologies that have beset the consciousness of conservative America. A group of people who can believe unbelievable things on almost any issue. Part of what I think is required now is for the Democrats and everyone else who is on the side of American democracy to ask themselves, what can I do? What can I put out into the world? And we can do asking that individually, and we can be asking that in terms of organizations, PACs, and political figures. What can I do to have the maximal impact on how much the American people are aligned with American democracy in the coming election? And maybe also, if both can be achieved, also help prepare the way that after what I hope will be an election blowout, and I think that's a possibility, rejecting Trump, that will be that much further in the direction of trying to reclaim our countrymen who've been put into a strange state of consciousness. There's room for a lot of creativity in such a project, because none of us, I expect, I don't know, what the effective message would look like. I do what I do with my messages. I can imagine that there are things that different groups of people. I mean, like the Lincoln Project has been very creative in what it's put out there in terms of advertising. I think that could be an area in which some people could be maybe creative and effective in buying 1 minute spots that paint a picture of reality in some effective way, fighting the lie. Also, believe that the Democrats have a job to do because of our champion, the champion of American democracy, President Biden, lacks certain strengths that would be to have. I mean, if he could get up in front of the microphones and deliver oratory at the level, say, that FDR did, be something. He's got the bully pulpit. That's where you would want to have a person who's effective at that. But I think very highly of the job that Joe Biden has done. I think he's shown himself to be more competent than most presidents in using his office and his administration to navigate his way forward. I would like for him to be a more press the battle kind of a guy, but he's experienced a lot, and he's shown that he knows how to make the system work. And he's shown that he's a competent man of goodwill. I do worry about his age, but we got what we got. I'm not going to paraphrase Don Rumsfeld about the army you've got, but that is the way the world is. It looks like we're going to have, and we'll probably be fine if we can reelect Joe Biden. I think that we'll be just fine, and it won't be. It won't be having chosen between the lesser of two evils. Also, if we can give him a Congress that will enable him to get things done, I think that he could have, like he did in his first 2 years, some genuine accomplishments. And we in the United States have been sorely in need of accomplishments. Joe Biden pretty much broke a logjam about accomplishment and what he is able to get through in the first couple of years. I think Biden will be fine. I do have some concerns, but you can't always be in a risk-free situation. I think that Trump will be rejected. And I think the Trump party will be rejected. And if the Democrats and the others who will weigh in are effective enough, I think that there's a possibility to have a blowout, even more than the blowouts, 1936 to 1972. There, I think it could be like 2/3, 1/3. If the Democrats are effective enough and powerful enough in getting Americans to see the reality. The Democrats have been loath to confront what the Republicans have been becoming. And there's been a fear of confrontation that I continue to worry weaken us in the coming months. I think that between now and Election Day, a big chunk of the Democratic effort should be to orchestrate public relations, public information, whatever, an attempt to influence how Americans understand and perceive this election. I think that a lot could be accomplished if it were widely undertaken and if there was some effort made to make the whole more than the sum of its parts. And I think that there's a space for a climactic moment in this campaign, which would be at the Democratic National Convention. And it would be a moment that was specifically chosen to maximizing being a kind of impactful message to all the American people, or to the nation, on behalf of American democracy and the rule of law and the values on which our nation was founded, and however it would be put. so that to have the maximal impact on the national audience, and to create also some more like sound bites that could be taken from this speech to reverberate in through campaign ads in the several months between the end of August, when the convention will be over, and the beginning of November, when people are voting, have voted. A spot in the convention to be filled by whoever could best fill that spot, to deliver a speech for the ages. We have a confrontation in America right now between a force of fascism and tyranny and authoritarianism and autocracy and make a list of all the things that it represents. The contrast has been increasingly stark. And the force of democracy and the rule of law, and what it is that our framers sought to create, and where power comes from the bottom up, the people constituting their rulers to achieve things on their behalf, versus the dynamic of tyranny, where the people are exploited and manipulated, and in many respects destroyed some by the ruling power that serves itself. I mean, Trump is an extraordinary person, but he exemplifies, like to such a huge extent, the fascism's complete devotion to what they want, without regard to the rights, the costs to, the needs of others. And Donald Trump is really pretty extraordinary in that respect. I keep on, I mean, this is, you're witnessing that I keep on coming back to how can anybody with any intelligence not know that Trump is in this just for himself? And if they know it, how can that be okay with them? Why would you want to give power to somebody who doesn't really care about anybody but himself? Anyway, I keep asking questions of myself like that. I have for years, and there's some level at which it remains a mystery. Which means that I think we're called upon, unless somebody really does understand exactly how. Maybe if maybe somebody understands how to undo it, like how you deprogram cult members or something like that. I certainly don't know, but I'm imagining that nobody really fully knows. The best we can do is to do our best. Human creativity is sometimes produces wonderful things. I can imagine having a speaker at the Democratic National Convention who does deliver a speech for the ages. Maybe in that speech there would be a line about guns, saying, we Americans can find our way to a place where we can all be safer and everybody's rights be respected. People are still free, even though they have some I think it turns out that more people want these things, background checks and all that kind of stuff. I think that the big majorities prefer some of these things. The problem has been that the intensity of the people who have been sold a bill of goods about the Second Amendment and the centrality of those rights makes them one-issue voters, and there may be a majority of people who would say to a pollster, "Yeah, I'm in favor of background checks, et cetera, et cetera," but they aren't going to vote on that basis. They haven't been put into this weird frame of mind in which a lie governs the whole thing. A one-issue voter on guns is probably somebody who believes a big lie about what the Constitution says, whether they're in danger of losing the guns they go hunting with, protecting their households. They've been sold a bunch of lies. Maybe there's some place to put that in. But whatever it is that will help move the American people, some who might have voted for Trump to vote against him, maybe some who were blind to how much they were being conned, to seeing what's clear about the bill of goods they've been sold. I can imagine that speech could go down in American history as something that brought to vivid life the sacred values that are at stake in terms of American civilization. The founders enshrined some beautiful things into that document that were making the world a whole lot more whole than they had been for millennia. Millennia of tyranny of various kinds. And here we've got a system being set up which is going to provide some important bottom-up. I mean, people are going to be free to speak. They're going to be free to publish what they want to publish. And they're going to have a voice in free and fair elections to choose who's going to wield the power of the state. That is way different from the general way of civilization for the first millennia. I mean, humankind has been challenged, excuse me, since the beginnings of civilization to find a way to control power. I focus mostly on control power in the anarchic system of civilized societies whose interactions are unregulated, but also to control power in terms of how a society gets set up. The step onto the path of civilization is a step from the natural order. It's extricating the creature extricating itself from the niche in which it evolved biologically, which means extricating itself from a natural order in which the parts selection has made the parts operate synergistically for the perpetuation of the DNA of various forms that are being passed into the future. That's what selection creates. And the step onto the path of civilization is a step out of that natural order and into a kind of disorder. clusters of such societies emerged, I gather, uh, in pristine form, I say, the anthropologists say, um, uh, in 6 different places on the earth. Mesopotamia, Egypt, India, the Yellow River in China, and 2 places in the New World. And in all those places, there's a social evolutionary process from the beginnings of people inventing their own way of life that leads in a consistent direction, so that what you end up with the emergence of the first empires, I don't know if I'm exaggerating how much kinship there is. My recollection from studying this stuff intensely back in the 1970s is that the first empires in all those 6 places have a lot in common. And a lot of what they have in common is how much top down they are. That anarchy inevitably creates a war of all against all. And a war of all against all inevitably creates a selective process. There is a selection for the things that can prevail in a war of all against all, and a selection against those things that get defeated or destroyed in such a war. Wherever we see anarchy, like in Lebanon in the 70s and 80s, and in Somalia in the 90s, you see that warlords come to the top. I think you could probably make a good historical case that the various pharaoh dynasties in Egypt, I don't know a ton about Egyptian history, but the emergence of various pharaonic dynasties, I'm betting that the way that the people got to be the people who were the pharaoh would be a selection for the ways of power, which can mean a whole lot of things, from technology to psychology to motivation, et cetera, et cetera. I think that if we see those 6 places, we find that a kind of tyranny emerges. And power goes a lot more from the top down to serve the power on top than it does from the bottom up to serve the well-being of the people as a whole. And there's a concept of the good that can be demonstrated to have a validity, but that's another story altogether, according to which a society in which the great mass of people are thriving and finding fulfillment is a better society than one in which there is torture and exploitation, cruelty. Better. Won't go into how that can be established. Go to betterhumanstory.org and look for value and something gets unleashed that is not a property of the species that created civilization. It's a product of the dynamic of the anarchic system, inevitably anarchic, and then therefore, and from there, an inevitable dynamic, a selection for the ways of power. So what you end up with is, as I say, the spirit of the gangster gets a disproportionate say in what the human world, the civilized world will become. So one of the things that my Better Human Story, I think, demonstrating that is that the ugliness we see in human history is human nature writ large. We put it this way, that if I could prove that the spirit of the gangster is going to be given a disproportionate say in shaping the human world, which is suggested by the way we end up with tyrannies and empires like we do in all those places. But that means that the ugliness that we see is a result of the selection for the spirit of the gangster. It's not what we are. I don't. I'm claim to show that we are better creatures than we have thought ourselves to be. I don't claim to say just what we are because I'm not sure how much that's laudable we can say that there is in human history, human nature built into us. But I use that same evolutionary perspective to, I think, demonstrate, again, go to betterhumanstory.org, that evolution has created in us certain experiential tendencies that have been selected for in the evolutionary process. And that are there because they somehow whatever they did to our ancestors to govern what our ancestors did, those experiential tendencies seem to be correlated with a success in getting one's DNA into the future, which is why we've got those experiential tendencies. The evolutionary perspective is what gives us this big picture. It's a big picture that shows, for example, that what we're up against in this fascist force here in the United States, in the Trump versus Biden confrontation, and in the wider war that's been going on on this for 30 some years, that war of fascism versus democracy is a version of something that emerges inevitably, in a way, in the systems of a civilization creating species. If the step onto the path of civilization has the inevitable consequences, I say I can show how it must have, then any creature that steps across the threshold of civilization and starts inventing its own way of life, extricating itself from the niche in which it evolved biologically, will unwittingly unleash a social evolutionary force that consistently works to make things more broken. A war of all against all is a good way of making a world that's quite broken, including the people in it. You know, we might see a lot of human brokenness around us, but it wasn't. That's not human nature writ large. We're growing up in a civilization that's been out of control in a fundamental way. So from the very beginning, inevitably, we're in a civilization that's been significantly distorted away from what people would choose, from the workings of power, which has not been controlled. And fascism is a way in which power is not controlled. And what Joe Biden represents as a candidate for president, as a guy who will let power be controlled. Let's give power to the guy who will respect the Constitution, not the guy who will trample on it. Maybe I should write that down. Or maybe that's something we should hear at the Democratic National Convention. Joe Biden is a decent guy who plays by the rules and is doing his best to make things work for the American people. People can disagree with him, but you'd have to be stupid not to recognize that this is a man of goodwill. Is a democratic America ready to press the battle? Somebody quoted recently something I've been quoting for almost 20 years. The good lack all conviction, while the evil are filled with a passionate intensity. I'm sensing that intensity is growing among the good. The starkness of what Trump represents. I mean, he's daring us with all the things that he says about that. He could he doesn't say I am an agent of that fascist dictator in Moscow, my buddy Vladimir Putin. He doesn't say it. But there he goes out on the stage and gratuitously strikes a blow against the cohesiveness of NATO by scaring all those countries that depend upon the United States with the notion that if he gets elected president, they will no longer be protected by the United States. No longer will the United States be the leader of the free world, doing Putin's work right out in front of everybody. He is the candidate of tyranny, just as Putin represents the force of tyranny. I've wrestled many times without satisfactory results with the question, why is it that this force of fascism has been gaining at the expense of the force of democracy on a global basis for nearly 20 years? I mean, I'm not making that up. I mean, it's an empirical measure made by some group whose business that is to monitor for democracy. Why is that? And I look around the world and I think about how many nations that are important nations have moved in that direction. I mean, not just Putin's Russia, since Yeltsin and some democracy, but also lately Modi in India, and beginning before him, and still Erdogan in Turkey, and Brazil's flirtation with the ugliness of Bolsonaro. These are, and Hungary going in that direction, and even Sweden and Italy, and various things happening that, and France, the rise of something, and the AfD in Deutschland. And then here in America, the possibility that a force of fascism, which has taken over pretty much completely one of our two major political parties, whether that might be given victory in the upcoming election. The good have lacked conviction in a way. It's a conviction that rises up in the good, but when they see the evil. I mean, sometimes it takes that. Sometimes it takes Hitler to invading Poland to make the nation that wouldn't listen to Churchill ready to fight. And it's taken Trump to awaken much of liberal America and the Democrats to speaking plainly about what they see and seeing it. It is important to see what we are up against. What we are up against is a kind of force of brokenness that manifests itself in many ways and that must be defeated. It makes America more broken in many ways. It must be defeated and fought in all sorts of ways, winning elections for starters, putting out messages after the election to help redeem some of the brokenness that resides in the Republican base. How do we bring people who have bought lies from a fascist force back into contact with reality. What we've got going for us, I think, I'm not sure I know what I'm talking about. I think what we've got for us is that there is a yearning for some kinds of goodness in them, and that maybe we can help them see that there are certain kinds of goodness, like people working together for the common good, that they should require of anybody that they want to support for public office. We could start there, lots of places, but somehow we need to bring this tens of millions of Americans who have bought into this profoundly false, manipulative, exploitative view of the world. We need to consider the reclamation of that consciousness, which is the core that drives this brokenness in these times, back in contact with what's real, so that the decency of decent people will be at play in their politics, not the opposite. And so that their intelligence also be at play in deciding what to support and what not to support to make for a better America, not having their intelligence switched off so that they can fail to see what's right in front of their noses. There's a big job to be done at so many levels. America has become broken for a great many reasons. We have to ask ourselves, why was liberal America incapable of playing its proper role as soon as this thing began? Why weren't we able to expose the poisoning that Rush Limbaugh was doing and all the stuff that came after? Left them to Fox News to turn in. People talked about the transformations psychological, like almost characterologically. I heard several stories of people whose like older parents were such and such a kind of person. And then for some reason they moved. The only station they got was Fox News or something like that. And they watch Fox News and they become a different person. Not in a good way. Not in a happy way. Fear. Rage. You know, it's a shame that people can be manipulated so well with fear and rage. I have been feeling, I've devoted my whole life to trying to understand the forces at work in the human world, and I'm aware that my work and thinking have been about the stuff that was going on when I was learning how to think. And that new things have happened in the last, in this age of, internet and AI and all that stuff. That I was already kind of an old guy, certainly fully formed in my worldview. And then this stuff started to happen. And I have felt that if I want to understand the forces at work in the human world, there seem to be some forces at work in the human world that I don't have a handle on how to think about. One of them is I read about algorithms, an article in the Yale Review that I was reading about algorithms and how they are shaping culture and such. I'm not necessarily recommending that article, but it got me thinking. It got me thinking that there are the social platforms, I don't know what all to call them, but things like Facebook and the others, TikTok, they all operate by algorithms, and the algorithm apparently, has had an impact on the human world. People think that it's tended to polarize us. And anyway, I don't Okay, so there's something going on here that looks like it's going to be a force that work in the human world, and I don't understand it. So I think about a friend of mine who's been involved in the such a world, even though he's only 5 years, 4 or 5 years younger than I am. Um, he really does know about the cybernetic world. So I arranged to have a phone conversation with him in which I'd ask him some about algorithms and what should I understand about how they work in the world. And the other thing I wanted to learn about was uh, oh, AI. You know, in the last, it doesn't seem like it's not been as long as 2 years, I don't think, but, the AI, chat, GPT, all kinds of things are, breaking into the world and people are talking about it a lot. And at least it seems to me that it's gotten to be a really big story that people, that this thing is off and running and it's powerful and it's going to have a big impact. And some people are worried about, what all might happen. Um, so, you know, if I'm going to be warning about, as I customarily do, I say, will human civilization survive, get its act together, or will we end civilization in a nuclear holocaust, which is one genuine way we might blow ourselves up? Will humankind destroy itself by having such a destructive impact on the biosphere that everything collapses? Which this climate change crisis suggests. Well, we don't know. We're doing that to some extent, and I don't claim to know to what extent. So, those things I've been knowing how to think about. I wanted my friend to educate me, so I maybe would make some progress in knowing how to think about those two technological things. And here's what I learned, and that if you've got companies operating websites that make money in proportion to how many people they can get to watch what they have to offer, that's how they make money, that they get revenue in terms of eyeballs and clicks and stuff like that. So their motivation is what capitalism basically tells them their motivation should be, which is to maximize their profit. And therefore, since they get their money by getting attention, they're going to try to find out how to get people's attention. And in order to do that, they're going to try to learn from what people have chosen in the past, what they clicked, what they want to see. And so you've got a selective process that's built into the system to give people more and more of this of the same, whatever gets them to click. So we're rewarding people for their predispositions. We're reinforcing them. I mean, telling them more and more what they already believe. It turns out that the best way to get people and hold them, my friend told me, is to cultivate their fear and rage. Now, I mean, people also like, playful, lovable kittens, but maybe that's true. I mean, it would make a certain evolutionary sense. If there's something that's making you feel afraid or angry, I mean, those are very powerful feelings that will direct you against what you're feeling afraid of and what you're feeling enraged at. You can see how we'd be selected for um, paying attention um, to something that evokes those kinds of feelings. If we're afraid of it, it's probably dangerous. That's what evolution probably had every reason to believe. So pay attention. You got to get through what's dangerous before you indulge yourself in anything, more positive. It's an emergency more than. I mean, it would be nice if instead of fear and rage, what really got us clicking was stuff that made us feel loving and uh, um, blissed out. Well, it would be nice, wouldn't it? But that's a state of relaxation, and so fear and rage are not a state of relaxation. Um, they're a state of dealing with something that has to be dealt with. So we click. We go further and further into finding out how evil our opponents are. At least that's the way some people will play that game. And I don't know. I've asked myself, am I, am I too indulgent of my desire to have my beliefs reinforced? I don't think so. I do protect myself some from things that are stressful. I've been so immersed in all this stuff for so long. I give myself complete permission to fast forward through Trump most of the time. Uh, I just have an allergic reaction to all the lies and sins and destructive things that are going on uh, in the Republican world. Uh, I, I I don't have a doubt uh, that I'm fundamentally right about the nature of the force I'm opposing and the nature of the force I'm working hard to contribute to. We're talking about fascism, lies, countries that Putin showed to invade their neighbors versus democracy, which where like Jack Smith, it's the truth that gets proven that is represented by a decent human being, not a human monster. I mean, we're really dealing here with what we're up against is basically a force of brokenness. What we're really seeing is something which is isomorphic with a couple of legitimate ways of conceiving what a battle between good and evil would look like. I mean, right down to the bottom of it. Uh, the things that make the human world better and the things that make the human world worse. That's not how American politics always was. This is a new thing in American politics. Um, it's new to have the two parties not be so much mixtures of the good and the evil, as I would say, characterize them. In the America I grew up in with Eisenhower as president. And such. No, it's been divided. It's been divided into two sides that are one's of like a photographic uh, negative of the other, if the people still understand what a negative is. What's dark on one side is bright on the other, and vice versa. So the Republicans have been for 30 years making a fight out of everything, refusing to cooperate, though that's what the nation needs, but making a fight out of everything, including trying to destroy Bill Clinton's presidency rather than work with it. the Democrats' role has been that they haven't engaged in that battle. They haven't fought the fight with as much intensity as the Republicans have, lack all conviction. Haven't put the pieces together, I think, is part of the problem. Now, what I claim that I can show the existence of something that is a coherent force that consistently works to make the human world worse. And I claim well, I assert, actually, that's a pretty good definition of a force of evil. And I claim to be able to show it, but actually, I can show it in two ways, which, and if you look on my YouTube channel, you'll find that I do demonstrate in one of the ways, which has to do with a coherent force that moves through the human world through time, that you can see it woven into the network of cause and effect in the human world, that brokenness is begetting brokenness, that you can see that with the rise of civilization, there actually is visible in the human world a coherent force that's spreading a shape-shifting pattern of brokenness and making the world broken in various ways as causality and effect move things through the human world over the generations and the millennia. But that wasn't really the way I discovered it. I discovered it first through a kind of a vivid experience, almost like of another intense dimension that I might call spiritual. And that led to my study. I saw something that the sense of evil came to me. I don't know how to explain that experience. I can only report it. It led me to employ my secular worldview, which is basically always has me investigating, what's going on in the human world, how are we to understand it. So I saw something evil taking over the right in 2004, and that changed the course of my life. Wasn't the first time some inexplicable, and I put my intellect to work, and I asked, well, what was that thing I saw? And I looked at and this was during the Republican National Convention that I saw it in 2004, and I started looking into the Republican Party and looking at it more closely, and I saw something that was. It was a coherent force that consistently is working to make things worse. Even back then, I thought that there was a consistency, that what they said in the W administration, that got itself reelected in 2005, was quite consistently acting like brokenness is what they wanted things to result in. Whatever they were trying to achieve, it seemed to be, and they were pretty good at achieving a lot of things, like defeating, like swift boating John Kerry. Whatever they achieved, they seemed to achieve it for unfortunate, destructive purposes. They were really good at propaganda, for example, like all those war on terror things that they did. But they used it wantonly at the expense of the nation. They've cultivated fear in the nation when there's nothing that people could do about it. And the thing I was going to tell before about the election of 2002, W, in cahoots perhaps with Dick Cheney and Karl Rove, decided to to betray the national unity that we had achieved after that trauma by making it a political weapon to use against the other party. The Democrats had rallied around the flag with them. But then as the election of 2002 approached, they came up with this way of destroying Democrats, utilizing the whole Saddam Hussein thing to put Democrats in an impossible position. It was a truly ugly political thing and showed utter sociopathy. I mean, Eisenhower would not have done that. Ronald Reagan would not have done that. But W was willing to exploit anything. He was already, he's a difficult man to figure. I won't go into my thoughts about W. But he was the one who chose Dick Cheney, and he chose Karl Rove. And even if he seems like a nice man now, he did a lot of fascistic. He moved us far in the direction of a fascistic Republican Party. He made us more vulnerable to something like Donald Trump coming up. To his credit, when he lost, when he had to leave the White House, he left the White House. It wasn't a time of honor. He left a mess. But he respected the American system enough to get out of Dodge. But Trump, I think we can show the American people who Trump is. I think that I would utilize some of the I would make some use of the physical, the tangible. I wish that we had a citizenry that would be moved by 4th of July kinds of things about, the rule of law and the consent of the governed and stuff like that. I think we've got some of that out there, but I don't think we have enough to entirely do the job. So I'm thinking about that, like in a speech for the ages or the advertising, someplace in the messaging that goes out into the world. We should get people to think about the implications of some of the more vivid images. Perhaps just of Donald Trump, maybe more of the whole Republican Party, like with the border deal, which is so ugly. And anyway, there are some vivid images of Donald Trump that can be conveyed. How he treated Mike Pence is one of those. Mike Pence was so obsequious. It was uncomfortable to watch a man selling his soul moment by moment for 4 years the way Mike Pence did. Acting like Donald Trump wasn't the ugly thing. He was, while Trump's Secretary of State was saying he was an effing moron, and while his chief of staff, John Kelly, was saying the things that he would say about him, Mike Pence was continually kissing Trump's backside. Disgusting to watch. And then the one courageous thing he does, when asked to outright violate the Constitution, he refuses. He wanted to do it, apparently. He wanted to be able to have somebody explain to him why he could do it, so he could be not attacking the Constitution, and also keeping in Trump's good graces. But he called a couple of people. He called Judge Luttig, apparently. I think first he called Dan Quayle, who'd been vice president under the first Bush. And both of them told him, you know, he had a constitutional duty. It wasn't his job to participate in this plot of Trump's. Uh, Ludigan, I think, in particular, left no doubt whatsoever. So he wanted to do it, but he was persuaded that it was his constitutional duty not to cooperate in overturning an election, which is what the plot was for. And what do we see in this man who, when the crowd is yelling, hang Mike Pence, he sends out this tweet to something or other that to further inflame the hang Mike Pence crowd against this vice president who's done everything he could up to going against the Constitution itself. He's willing to sacrifice to punish. You can see it in his speech there on the web. We hope Mike Pence does the right thing. It is so ugly to contemplate what kind of human being would do that. I think we could find a way to present that as an advertisement. This is the man who did this to his vice president. We could also put him up with what the Homeland Security aide for Mike Pence has told the whole country, or has tried to tell the country, about how little he cared about protecting the American people from the pandemic, how he focused only on how he could play the situation for his political advantage. And then you could bring in some epidemiologists who can say, yeah, and 200,000 more Americans died because this man was so selfish. And then there's a very, what's the word I'm looking for? But it's really quite down to earth and visceral, and something that people experience at a level that is more profoundly, like essential being as animals. Than something, like the Bill of Rights and democracy is really vital. But we're not as deeply attuned to its meaning as we are to the meaning of what happened, of what Donald Trump did, man to woman, to E. Jean Carroll. I've known a lot of men in my life. My circle of friends is far from, random. But I've also known a lot of men who haven't been my friends. And I think I've known a fair number of them well enough to say that the picture of Donald Trump that we can see enacted right in front of our eyes and easily demonstrated by what jury has found, et cetera, et cetera. We can experience, if we can get people to envision just enough and in just the right way, what it says about Donald Trump, that he would do what he did with his hand to this decent American woman who's actually quite accomplished and who thought she was there to interview him. What kind of man would do that? Nobody I've ever known, I don't think. I don't think I know anybody like that. That's not locker room talk. I never heard that in any of the locker rooms. Football, basketball, tennis, all the sports and together. in the same locker room, a lot of banter back and forth. I never heard anything remotely like somebody bragging like Donald Trump did on the Hollywood Access tape. So that's one thing we can do. For I think that we hope that there will be a speech for the ages, but I think we also could use a campaign of advertisements that get people to get it into where it registers. What a human monster this Donald Trump is, which could also give birth to a subsequent kind of advertisement where you show that this human monster is talking about doing this and this and this. It's worth putting out some ideas about NATO. We can have some very patriotic advertisement out there about the role that America has played in the world, the treaty that we found, the fact that it is the law of the land that we are members of the NATO treaty and we are bound by this thing that Donald Trump says he would not honor. Well, we don't need any more demonstration of his lawlessness after all the 91 indictments. But if we needed any more, here it is. He's saying that he would violate the law, and encourage our enemy to attack the friend to whom we are bound by treaty obligations. We don't need a criminal in the White House. There can be a lot of connections between the things that he shows about himself and what his presidency would represent. I think we can get, maybe we should aspire to. I'm a guy with a long history of trying to hit balls over the fence and having to settle for a single. But anyway, I think we should try to hit the ball over the fence and win 2-1 in the upcoming election and give Biden not just 4 years, which I think he'd be able to use okay despite his age, but also a House and a Senate that he can work with in a way that will get good things done for the whole country. I mean, we had a transformative president in FDR, who was elected in 32, took office in 33, launched the New Deal, accomplished huge amount of stuff. Lawrence O'Donnell said the other night that he transformed the country more in his term of office. And of course, he had 4 terms. Well, he got into the 4th term. Then all of the previous presidents combined. I'd be interested to see if that holds up. But he was enormously transformative. Barack Obama, I was happy to hear at the beginning of his presidency that he had ambitions to be a transformative president. I thought the country would be ready for it because he had been handed such a damaged country. The Iraq War, the state of the world economy, the financial crisis, et cetera, climate crisis. I thought that he would have a mandate to do a lot, and with the world in a lot of disrepair, like with the FDR, it would be a time for rebuilding things better. That Build Back Better. I could envision when Obama ran that we might get a Build Back Better under Obama. Boy, that's a lot of B's, but he aspired to do that. And I thought he could do it. But he had that liberal weakness of not fighting the fight that needs to be fought. And by the end, he was essentially robbed of the ability to get anything through Congress. He had been pushed back into the fortress, off the lands of his fiefdom, and back into his fortress where all he could do was executive orders. Yeah, this liberal weakness has been around for a long time. I actually do believe that that if we had a full understanding of how America got this broken, there would be a relationship, in a sense, between what happened on the right, where we got a force that was really good in the struggle for power, but was morally bankrupt, and then this photographic negative on the liberal side. I get the whoops. I get confused by the mirror, the non-mirror nature of it. That on the liberal side, you have the opposite. You get something that's increasingly aligned with the good, so that you get these great legal thinkers coming up there and being almost rhapsodic about the value of the rule of law. And they're standing for the good, but the liberal side is lacking something about how to make sure they win the struggle for power against this thing that's taking over the right. It's photographic negative. The challenge for human beings has been from the outset of civilization to find a way of combining civilization with goodness, and goodness being defined as that which makes things more whole. And we can keep on going with the definitions of more whole, but it ends up being very isomorphic, as I like to say in the last few days, with the needs of life and fulfillment. Life over death, and fulfillment of positive experience over negative experience. I claim that they're all that can be woven together, and there is something that we can accomplish by defeating the top-down thing that is one of the main agents in the brokenness that we see in civilization. In the Middle Ages, or the Dark Ages, when the Roman order had broken down, the land of Europe was anarchic. There was no, in that anarchy, you had marauding gangs. And out of the era of those marauding gangs, you end up with a feudal system, which consists of the successful gangsters that emerged out of the age of marauding gangs, setting themselves up as the dominant power over their serfs, whom they're able to exploit. And then over time, this becomes the basis of an aristocracy, where it isn't so much the gangsters who roam the land that are in this top-down power arrangement. They are their descendants who have become the aristocrats. An aristocrat is the descendant of a gangster, basically. I think that that's probably true around Europe, and it's I'm guessing it's probably true wherever you would have seen that kind of a system emerge. My guess is that it emerged pretty much everywhere where civilization developed. I wish I had more information at my memory fingertips, but I think that if you look at how Chinese civilization emerged, it was also that way, that warlords are what emerged. I mean, you can see that dynamic happening in Afghanistan of this, and probably every other era. The warlord. Going back to that idea that the ugliness that we see in human history is not human nature writ large. I've really latched on to that sentence. I think it's a very important sentence that I can say, if that were true, would you want to know? And I think that there are a lot of people who would say yes, or at least that's my hope. And I do think I can show that it's true. The human world that's in an anarchic situation, such you can have marauding gangs, it's going to inevitably end up under the control of whoever it is that's able to seize that power. That's why when something like Donald Trump's insurrection happens, it is such a terribly backward step. I mean, what our Constitution's about is, well, power is not something that's going to be conceived. I mean, sorry, it's not something that's going to be seized. It's who holds the power is going to be determined by these rules. And those rules are just an enormous step forward. It makes the human world more whole in a way that has been broken ever since the first tyrants emerged. So it's a really important part of the human struggle to create a better human world. To get it right, that power should be the instrument of the people and not the people the instrument to be exploited by the kind of gangster that's going to be the one that's wielding the power, at least probabilistically. It's not that only gangsterism gets selected for. I mean, you got to also be able to keep the people fed. So it could be worse. But it's plenty bad enough what gets selected for. And we can see that in history. And that's why the ugliness we see in human history is not human nature writ large. That it's going to be gangsters that are calling a lot of the shots. And that's not a reflection on human nature. Any creature that stepped across that threshold on any planet, anywhere in the cosmos, would have been subjected to that same social evolutionary force that would have made some of the worst of its potentialities very powerful in shaping that civilization creating species world. Part of the reason why I think getting this multidimensional picture out into the world is could have a beneficial impact is, I mean, if that were all that happened, is that we understood that we're better creatures than we have thought ourselves to be. And it isn't all, that isn't the only advantageous impact, but it does show that we are better creatures than we have thought ourselves to be. And we shouldn't think of ourselves the way we do. A society in which whenever somebody says, well, that's human nature, what they're usually pointing at is one of our defects. I can't say, as I've said, just how good we are, but I think it would make a huge difference if we are able to separate what we see and see in ourselves, see in the world around us, see in the history of civilization. That's a function of a force of brokenness that got loosed into the human world, not by any fault of ours, but just because we happen to be the creature that had the creative intelligence to take that step. You know, everybody else on the planet, every other life form, they're basically stuck with the hand they got dealt by the evolutionary process. This is where you're going to be. This is how you sustain your life. This is how you get born. This is how you die. This is what you eat. Everybody's stuck there, but this one creature with creative intelligence to change its rules, extricate itself, invent its own way of life. There's a battle that gets unleashed in the human world when this force of selection gets unleashed and makes everything so broken the way you would expect it would be broken. If there's a war of all against all, a lot of people are being tyrannized and wounded and losing loved ones and you know, all that ugly stuff isn't good for people. I mean, what I wonder is, if you ask people, would you like to live in a world that's at peace or at war, and with character with lots of love or lots of hate, justice or injustice? I believe that people would choose the benign one in each of those categories. I think that people would sincerely mean it. Now, there might be difficulties in how do you set up a world that realizes all those things. But I think that's what people would want. But that's not the world we got. And there's a reason that's not the world we got. And I think it's very beneficial for us to understand that the reason that we got a different kind of a world is that we unwittingly unleashed a social evolutionary force. Not because we are what we thought we were, this defective creature that's, selfish and combative and, the ugly pictures that we've painted of ourselves. Not because of that, but it would happen to any creature. And that's what I claim to be able to prove. And I lay it out systematically. This is not in my effort to lay it out systematically, though I kind of did in a very fast way earlier. But it can be shown that just the step out of the biologically evolved system into something that has not got the biological order or any other new order has enormous ramifications, regardless of the nature of this creature. And I think that if we recognize that we are better creatures, we actually will be empowered to create a better world than if we have low expectations of ourselves, like the culture that has taught us about original sin has given us that low estimation. But if you also look to the force that gets unleashed, that's an additional advantage in determining whether not only are we going to feel better about ourselves and be stronger in the battle and believe more in our ability to accomplish more, but we're also going to be came and went. I mostly am happy to be almost 78 years old, but momentarily things. We also can see the forces that are at work and understand what we're up against and what it might take to defeat it. Seeing the forces that are at work means understanding that out of that social evolutionary dynamic, there has come into the human world a battle between two coherent forces. And we need to make sure that the better side of that battle prevails. That's essentially the human challenge, and it would be the challenge that would be faced by any civilization-creating creature. Any creature that that steps into that will unleash a process in which civilization unfolds to become more and more powerful, but also in a situation in which power has not yet been controlled well. The selection for the ways of power is not the choice of the creature, it's the imposed by the system. Eventually, the possibility of self-destruction is going to emerge as the civilization becomes more and more powerful, in general, as a trajectory over time. Eventually, it'll have the power to destroy itself, either with its weapons or how it treats the biosphere. And there are two sides still contending over the human future. The one that has its root in the experiential tendencies that the spiritual spaces that have been selected for because they're life-serving, that evolution has put in us, and the force that emerges when a creature starts to invent its own way of life. I actually do claim that, to my satisfaction, I can show that any creature that steps across the threshold into civilization will have a world in which there's something going on that's reasonable to call the battle between good and evil. The battle between good and evil takes place at all kinds of levels. The gun issue is one avenue into seeing how it plays out. I mean, a society in which tens of millions of thousands of people are not sacrificed for no good reason by gun violence and in which millions are probably feeling less at home in the world because of those events. That there is a distinction between those worlds. One of them is better than the other. A world that people feel secure in is better. A world in which people have not been slaughtered is better. That's just one of the places in which the battle gets fought. And it's no surprise that the Republican Party and the Supreme Court that the Republican Party has given us would take the kind of brokenness inducing steps that they took in their decisions. Passing laws like in Missouri, so we get events like that, and handing down decisions like this Republican-controlled Supreme Court has, absolutely foolishly condemning the whole society to conflict, a division between the American people over the issue of guns rather than people coming together to come up with a good solution, which we even certainly can, as is witnessed by all those societies out there that has done perfectly well in maintaining a decent and free society while not being exposed to the 10 times as many murders that we've got. Brokenness begets brokenness. We're up against a very complex, powerful system that's been a part of the human world since we stepped into that disorder, at least. And I think we'll do better to make our world more whole in the ways that we need to if we understand the wholeness of that problem. That it's got to do with things at almost every level, from the psychological to the familial, to the community, to schools, to governments, to the international order, to the world of thought and creativity. There are all kinds of levels at which the relationship between men and women. Brokenness is larded into the human world that has unfolded in the last 10 or 12,000 years. There are some places where it becomes an important showdown, like the election of 2024. But everything in the human world is pretty much, eligible to be a place where the overall drama is getting played out over time. The more we understand all the interconnections and the nature of the forces at work, the better able we will be to meet the central challenge that any civilization-creating species is going to have to meet. And here's how I'd articulate that central challenge that we face as a species now, in which, by the way, the election of 2024 is not a trivial part. The challenge is to order our civilization, the whole planetary thing, well enough and soon enough to avoid the kinds of self-destruction that we can see we're capable of. To order ourselves well enough for human civilization to be able to continue and thrive on this planet for the long term. That is ultimately what are the stakes. And the battle at the ballot box that's coming up is one of the places where history is focusing a crucial encounter between the forces that would lead to human civilization destroying itself and the forces that would build a civilization where human beings can survive for the long haul and thrive, and where the life on Earth can also flourish. Thank you. That's the end of this Thursday's A Man on a Mission. I hope that I've conveyed something about the possibility that there is an integrative vision of what's happened to our species that could be useful if, as I think is the case, it could go either way, whether we get our act together or whether we destroy ourselves. I hope that you think there's at least it's feasible, that there might be something that's been put together that would enable human beings to rise to this challenge a bit better. And that if it is a toss-up, like I think it is, a bit better might be a bit that matters. So that's why I am out here on this mission. I hope that you'll join me in that mission, or at least if check it out enough to become convinced whether there is a potential here to have a beneficial impact. There aren't a whole lot of places where one can see, well, what can I do here to increase the chances that human civilization will survive? This might be one of them. It looks plausible enough that I'm out here. It has inspired me for over 53 years. And to me, it looks really like it could have a beneficial impact. It puts some things in an importantly different light. Understand ourselves differently. Understand our story as a species differently. And understand the nature of the challenge that we face differently. All in ways that I think would be helpful. Anyway, thanks for listening.